Okay, so let's start. So welcome to this session of information dedicated to Erasmus Plus virtual exchange for higher education and youth. We are happy to present you this action, which supports and promotes important values such as intercultural dialogue, tolerance, among other values, but also it is an action that gives the opportunity to many young people to develop their digital skills and their soft skills. So in a context where many young people do not have access to mobility, a situation which is in addition aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, we think that virtual exchanges are all the more relevant. So today, as you can see on the agenda, we will give you key information to submit a successful application. So the event will last around 2 hours and a half. We will begin by a presentation of the political context in which this action takes place. So it will be Mr. Germán Bernal Ríos from the Directorate General Education and Culture, who will be the speaker. And after his intervention, we will answer some of your questions. Then we will have Roisin McCabe, who will explain you how to prepare your application, taking into consideration the conditions stipulated in the call for proposal. Eric Ballhausen will follow and will show you how to submit your application in the funding and tender portal. Finally, but not lastly, Alina Philemon will give you key elements to consider when budgeting your project. So around 4 o'clock, we will have a break of 30 minutes. And then at 4:30, we will resume the event with a session of question and answers. We will then have the time for closing the event. Speaking about your questions, you will have the opportunity during the event to ask your questions via the Slido platform. So as you can see on the slide, you will have three solutions to access the event on the Slido platform. The first one is to use your browser and to go to www.slido.com. You will then enter the password infodev. The second one is to use directly the second link that you can see on the slide, and there you will be directed directly on the event without any password. And finally, you will have a third means of doing that. It is with your smartphone. If you have the app downloaded, then you can scan the QR code that you see right there on the screen. Voila, so I will stop here to leave the floor to the speaker. But first of all, let me wish you a useful and informative event. Thank you. Eric, the floor is yours. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Marie-Luce. Okay, we continue. And I'm happy to announce Germán Bernal Ríos, who will talk about the policy context, the objectives, and expected outcomes of the call. Germán, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. And on behalf of the European Commission, I would like to thank all the participants who are following us for this online info session for your interest in participating in the first call for proposals of this new and exciting action of the Erasmus Plus program, the virtual exchanges. It is a new action indeed, because until now it was only a pilot of the previous Erasmus Plus program, but from now on it will be a fully fledged activity of the Erasmus Plus program with yearly calls for proposals. My presentation today will be very general. I want to give you a taste of what is the policy framework for launching such action at this moment, and giving you some hints on where to look at when you are preparing your applications, and also to illustrate what are the objectives and the expected outcomes of this first call for proposals for virtual exchanges, considering also the work that we undertook for the last 3 years under the previous pilot, which I will also briefly speak about. So first of all, when we look at the current EU education and youth policy context, I want to highlight some key milestones that we have been going through in the last couple of years. First of all, this is the first year of the new Erasmus Plus program running from 2021 until 2027, which has a clear objective of boosting international cooperation with third countries. Being more international is an important feature of this program, of the new program. And it has also very important objectives shared with many policy areas across the Commission, namely inclusion, social inclusion, to include as much people as possible that were not able, maybe until now, to participate in our programs, and to support the green and digital transitions through the education and training systems. Secondly, I have to mention the European education area, which is an objective, very ambitious objective, basically to create a free area of learners, free movement of learners across the European Union. It also includes an ambitious geopolitical dimension and also foresees contributing to the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Another important milestone is the Digital Education Action Plan. This is a call for action to make education and training systems fit for the digital age, including global cooperation around these issues, particularly with certain priority regions. We are all very much aware, of course, of the impact, the enormous impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had upon education and training systems across the world. And one of the key objectives of the new program is to support the resilience of the education and training systems across the world as well. And finally, I want to mention as well the EU Youth Strategy 2019-2027, which is an ambitious strategy around the 3 keywords of engaging, connecting, and empowering young people. In this brief presentation, we do not have the time to present in detail every one of these ambitious policy documents or what we know of the impact of the COVID-19 upon education and training systems. But I want to encourage through this presentation to look at these documents, to analyze them, and to see how your objectives, your proposed projects fit into the objectives of these new policy initiatives. Then I want to mention also the current EU external policy context. This is very important in the context of this call because the call, as I will mention later, addresses certain priority regions. So it's important to take into account what is the current EU policy addressing these regions. First, I want to mention the high priority that the Commission is giving to the Western Balkans region, the countries that are candidate countries or potential candidate countries for joining the EU. There is an ambitious document called the EU Western Balkans Agenda on Innovation, Research, Culture, Youth and Sport from 2021. Secondly, I want to mention the Eastern Partnership. There is an ambitious document also called Recovery, Resilience and Reform, Post-2020 Eastern Partnership Priorities. When it comes to the Southern Neighborhood, the Southern Mediterranean, this year also the Commission and the European External Action Service adopted a communication followed by Council conclusions on a renewed partnership with the Southern Neighborhood, a new agenda for the Mediterranean. Relations with Russia are also one of the key priorities of the EU, and that is why we also include Russia among the regions covered by virtual exchanges. So there is this communication on pushback, constrain, and engage with Russia in the terms of EU-Russia relations. And finally, I want to mention the document towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa. As I said, we do not have the time now to look in detail about these documents, but if you are planning to cooperate with one of these regions, I encourage you to look at these documents and to see how the topics of education and youth feature quite highly for the cooperation of the EU with every one of these regions. Obviously, we want that our virtual exchanges projects contribute towards the EU policy goals when engaging with these regions of the world. Now we go to the substance. What are the virtual exchanges? Virtual exchanges obviously is not just sending some emails around or following some online course all together at the same time. Virtual exchanges are online to people activities in our definition, promoting intercultural dialogue and the development of soft skills. What is the objective of virtual exchanges in the end? The key objective is that every young person has access to high-quality international and cross-cultural education both formal and non-formal, without physical mobility. And that is because we know that physical mobility, of course, reaps the highest number of benefits possible for the participants. But we know that not everybody is going to be able to access physical mobility. And we also know that even persons participating in physical mobility could benefit, for instance, before that physical mobility, of engaging in virtual exchanges to build their intercultural skills. So this is the definition that we have for virtual exchanges that you will find in the call for proposals. The virtual exchanges that we are promoting through this call take place always in small groups and are always moderated by a trained facilitator. And this is a very important feature of our virtual exchanges. Learners, participants do not participate on their own in isolation, but the participation is facilitated by a trained person that moderates and ensures the quality and the learning dimension, as I will explain later, of these virtual exchanges. And this is the last part, the learning dimensions. The virtual exchanges should be easily integrated into projects in the youth field, and by youth I mean non-formal education projects addressing young people or higher education courses. And we will speak more about this in a few minutes. So what about the work that the Commission has done until now in the field of virtual exchanges? Until now, there was a pilot project, a big pilot project running between 2018 and 2020. The origins of the project go back to the Paris Declaration of 2015. You may remember the terror attacks that happened in Paris in 2015 and also in Denmark. And following this, there was a ministerial meeting, an informal ministerial meeting of the Ministers of Higher Education and the European Commission, where the Paris Declaration was adopted. The Paris Declaration on the promotion through education of tolerance, common values of freedom, etc., intercultural skills. So following this declaration, the virtual exchanges pilot was launched with the objective of promoting social, civic, and intercultural competences, and particularly of enhancing critical thinking and media literacy, as everybody was very sensitized at that moment about what impact do social media or other types of media have in the radicalization of certain individuals. In any case, there was a decision to launch a pilot project focusing on these competences with the Southern Mediterranean region, covering the countries that you can see there in acronyms: Algeria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Palestine, Syria, and Tunisia, focusing on these countries and also involving the Erasmus Plus program countries. So it was a project really of virtual exchanges between Europe and the Southern Mediterranean. This project was of a big size. The total budget was of €6 million. It was split in 3 years, and it was led by a consortium of organizations. The project was quite successful, I think, because it managed to engage 30,000 participants in a very balanced way. Also, half of the participants came from Europe and half of the participants came from the Southern Mediterranean region. And there was a richness of different virtual exchanges, both covering higher education and youth organizations. The topics were very varied. They covered current affairs, religion, culture, racism, gender issues, the environment. The pilot project remains, in our spirit, a source of inspiration when you are going to prepare your own projects. And therefore, you will find all the information about the pilot project available in the European Youth Portal. Now, when it comes to the 2021 call, what are the main features? Well, the objectives and the activities are similar to the ones I just described out of the pilot, but we have decided to considerably enlarge the scope of the project. We will fund projects with the Western Balkans regions, with the Eastern neighborhood, with Russia, with the Southern neighborhood, and with Sub-Saharan Africa as well, with the amounts that you see there. These amounts are for the 2021 call for proposals. In fact, the idea is that this activity is going to grow over the years, but we want to go slowly to start with a small call with a few projects, and in the future to grow this into a bigger number of projects. But first, we want to get the first projects right from the beginning. The maximum contribution per project will be of €500,000. So it doesn't mean that you have to apply for the maximum. Of course, you could have a project for half of that or even less. It depends very much on the activities that you are going to undertake. But as I said, what I want to emphasize is that this is the first call for proposals. There will be more opportunities to participate in this new activity. The specific objectives of this call are the following: to encourage intercultural dialogue with the partner countries and to increase tolerance through online people-to-people interactions, to promote various types of virtual exchanges, allowing more young people to benefit from intercultural and international experience. Very importantly, to enhance critical thinking and media literacy, particularly in the internet, in the use of the internet and social media, to foster the digital and soft skills development of students, young people and youth workers, to promote citizenship and the common values of freedom, tolerance and non-discrimination through education, and to strengthen the youth dimension in the relations of the EU with partner countries. These are the objectives of the call. As you can see, they gather very much all the objectives that we had in the pilot, but the pilot was a very big single project. This doesn't mean, of course, that you have to address all of these objectives in your individual projects. In your individual projects, normally you will address one or two, maybe, of these objectives, but these are the objectives that we broadly want to meet through this call for proposals. The expected outcomes, this is about the activities that you would have to undertake to participate in this. Well, when it comes to topics and activities, this is a very bottom-up, very open call. We are not setting for this call for proposals any specific topics. But what is very important is that all projects are expected to have a learning dimension and to report on it. It's important that you report on what have participants learned through the participation in the virtual exchanges of your organizations. Then, basically, it's about online facilitated discussions that could be done as part of youth projects or training of youth workers for virtual exchanges. And the same thing for higher education courses. Online facilitated discussions as part of higher education courses or training for university professors or staff for doing virtual exchanges. When it comes to open online courses, this is a question that normally comes around. Is it possible to do this as a course? Well, it's possible as long as they are very much interactive and there is a strong focus on the cross-border exchanges. What we don't want to have is simply a massive online open course that is there for everybody to use. There has to be a very high degree of interactivity and cross-cultural, cross-border exchanges there available. And I want to stress that you should rely as much as possible on existing tools and platforms. My colleagues from the executive agency will address this in more detail probably, but this is not a project to fund infrastructure. Basically, you must have as much infrastructure as possible, but there are certain possibilities of funding technical tools for participating in this project. With this, I want to conclude and open the floor for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Germán. Sorry, I will put off my mask. Okay, so I'm just looking to my colleagues who are managing the Slido, just to remind everybody that questions can be posted in Slido throughout the event, and we are collecting them. So if we don't have time now or opportunity to answer them directly, feel free to come back also to previous presentations to put questions in Slido. We are collecting them and we will have time in the question and answer session, but also if there are still questions coming a bit afterwards, we will collect them and publish them in a frequently asked question document, which will be available from the website of the agency where this event was published, and also in the application to the funding and tender portal. Germán, we have one question related to the regions, that there are different regions and participants. Could you maybe briefly explain the underlying idea behind that?
Yes, I will go back, if you allow, to the slide where I detailed the regions. You have to know which countries participate in each region. Of course, this is described in the text of the call for proposals, but it's also important to know that the participants have to be based in the countries of the organizations of these regions. That means, for instance, it is not possible to have an organization with Russia, an organization based, let's imagine, in Russia, where will be based in, let's say, Kazakhstan or another country in Central Asia. Participants have to be based in the countries of the organization. And also it's important that every project draws participants from the partner country regions, but also from the European Union or countries associated to Erasmus Plus participating in the program. It has to bridge both. It is not possible in this call to mix these different regions. This is a small call for proposals, and then we want to maximize the impact of the exchanges between the EU or countries associated to Erasmus Plus and the countries in the partner countries regions.
Okay, thank you. That is very clear. And related to that, we had another question concerning that there's the call addresses both the youth sector and the higher education sector. How that works?
Yes, one of the innovative aspects of this project, of the virtual exchanges, is that it seeks to bridge the higher education and youth sectors, because learning takes place in all places, in universities or in youth organizations as well. In this call for proposals, we are very open. It's possible to do a course, to do a project that only addresses higher education. It's also possible to do a project that only addresses youth, the youth sector. It's also possible to do a project that bridges both. What is important is that you meet the eligibility criteria in terms of organizations. That will be explained in a few minutes by my colleagues. But it's true, I want to mention that we normally work in a way where higher education sector is stronger than youth non-formal education sector. We really want to see both sectors covered in this call for proposals. We have not preset a budget for every sector, but we would like to see in the end projects addressing at least projects where we address both sectors, not necessarily at the same time, but in different projects, but we really ambition having high quality projects also for the youth sector. So we encourage all youth organizations to be really involved in this call for proposals.
Okay, thank you very much, Herman. These were the two questions for the time being. Thank you. We will move on. As I just said, we will move on, but you can still ask questions if you want to for the political. And I will just move the slides. So, and just to say, so the answers Herman gave were more in the framework of the political context. Now we're coming to the part, the more technical part of the call. So there will be further information on organizations, how to participate, and also the regions further explained. We will now move to how to prepare an application, and I ask my colleague Rushin McCabe to come and present this for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you today for this exciting new action. The aim of this presentation is to help you prepare your application by giving you the basic information you need. We also want to give you an insight into the selection process, how it's carried out by our external experts, and the criteria that are used to assess your application. This presentation is aimed at those with no prior knowledge of EU funding mechanisms, so it's quite basic. However, I have seen a number of very interesting questions in Slido about countries that are eligible, about composition of the consortium, so I will address all of those in my presentation. And if you have any questions that haven't been addressed, you're very welcome to post your questions in Slido, and they can be dealt with in the Q&A session. Okay. So in this presentation, I'm going to look at the 4 broad sets of criteria that are used to assess your application. And in the second part of the application, I'm going to look at the 3 application forms, Part A, Part B, and Part C. Firstly, a brief introduction on the timetable, the budget, the basic partners, and the basic information that anyone applying needs to know. So, The call deadline is 22nd of February 2022 at 5 p.m. Brussels time sharp. The evaluation of proposals takes place between March and July, and the applicants will be informed in August. That means that grant agreements can be signed between September and November. And all of this means that if you're applying for project funding now and you are selected, you will be starting your project in November 2022. Very important information here on the budget, what everybody wants to know. This is a budget-based grant. What that means, not a lump sum grant which is used by other actions on Erasmus+. So this one is quite different because it's based on estimated real costs for your project. So grants are based on the reimbursement of the eligible costs which have actually been incurred by beneficiaries for carrying out the activities in question. The maximum amount of funding per project is €500,000. Of that, we are willing to co-finance 95%, which is very generous compared to other actions. So you only have to fund 5% of it. And as Herman was showing you earlier, the total budget available for all regions is €4 million. So if you're thinking of participating, there are 3 different roles in which you can participate in this call. The first is as coordinator. So the coordinator is the organisation that submits the project proposal on behalf of all partners. Then we have full partners. So full partners are very actively involved in the project and they receive part of the grant and they appear in financial budget tables. Whereas associated partners can also contribute to activities or support the promotion and sustainability of the project, but they do not receive any funding for their participation. So they do not appear in the finances of the project. I've mentioned the deadline. There are a number of admissibility criteria. So in addition to making the deadline, you must submit via the Funding and Tenders portal. This is a new EU portal, and Eric is going to take you on a tour through it shortly. Your proposal must be complete, so you must complete all of Part A, B, and C. And your proposal is limited to 70 pages. I'm mentioning this because additional pages appear blank in the system, and so they cannot be assessed. So it's very important that you stick to the 70-page deadline. So in the next part of the presentation, I'm going to look at how your proposal will be assessed. There are 4 broad criteria that are used, and all of these are applied rigorously to every application received. So you need to make sure that your proposal respects these criteria. All of these can be found in the call document. So just very briefly here as an introduction, and then I'm going to go into each one in much more detail. The first one is the eligibility criteria. So this is what we use at the very start of the application process. And we check whether projects comply with these basic eligibility criteria, and if they do, they're eligible to go on to the next stage of the selection process. Secondly, we have the exclusion criteria. So an applicant will be excluded from participating if they are found to be in one of the situations that's described in the call. These are explicitly mentioned, for example, being bankrupt, being accused of fraud, for example, professional misconduct, etc., etc. The third are selection criteria. We're going to go into these in these are the applicant's financial and operational capacity. And for these, we'll see, you'll be asked to submit some documents, so we can check that. And finally, the 4 award criteria. These allow the executive agency to evaluate the quality of the project proposals submitted, and proposals must pass the minimum threshold for each of these in order to be considered for funding. So that's a brief overview of these 4 broad sets of criteria. I am now going to enter into more detail on each one of them. So the first we're going to look at is the eligibility criteria. So there are a number of eligibility criteria. The first one is that the duration should normally be 3 years, that is 36 months when no extensions are granted. So it is possible to be granted an extension, but it must be duly justified and it requires an amendment of your grant agreement. So that's why we write normally 3 years. But yes, the duration is 3 years, 36 months. Secondly, the regions of the world that can participate. Herman has already given you an overview of these. I see that there have been many questions in the Slido from different countries. I'm asking, I think, Bhutan, Tunisia, many countries asking, can my country participate? Can my country participate? The list of countries in each region is extremely long, and so I'm not going to be able to call out each country now. But what I would recommend you do is that you go to page 11 of the call document, and under each region, each individual country is mentioned there. And so that should answer your question for you in Slido. So thank you for those questions. We appreciate them. Your answer can be found on page 11 of the call document. Please check this carefully. And also another reason to check this carefully is that these are EU regions. So for example, sometimes private sector companies used other categorizations for regions. So don't assume that your country belongs to one region if you're new to EU funding. Please check carefully which countries belong to which region. So every project must have Erasmus Plus program country partners and then partners from one of these regions that Herman has mentioned. So Western Balkans, Eastern Neighbourhood, Southern Mediterranean, Russia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. However, the applicant must come from an Erasmus Plus program country, and that's very important. So, the eligibility criteria, who can apply as a coordinator? So, if you'd like to be a coordinator, you must be a public or private organisation active in the field of higher education or youth in a programme country, an EU programme country. Higher education institutions, associations, or organisations of higher education institutions, as well as legally recognised national or international rector, teacher, or student organisations established in EU programme countries can be coordinator. That's very important. But if you're a higher education institution, you need to have an Erasmus charter for higher education. So the next eligibility criteria are partners. What do you need to be an eligible partner? Well, the good news is that it's the same list as I've just mentioned for applicants. The only difference is that partners can be based in a partner country as well as an EU programme country. Eligible criteria, these are all mentioned in the call document, and so I leave you to read those in detail. This is just a brief overview. And the next point is very important. It's an eligibility criteria that we call partnership composition. And the reason it's very important is that sometimes we receive applications where organisations have done a tremendous amount of work, months and months, putting together an application. But their application doesn't meet the partnership composition criteria. So before you start your project, it's really important that you look very carefully at the partnership composition. And for this call, the partnership should look like this. There should be, first of all, we must have organizations from EU program countries and partner countries. There must be a minimum of 2 higher education institutions and or youth organizations from 2 or more Erasmus Plus program countries, and a minimum of 2 higher education institutions and or 2 youth organizations from 2 or more different partner countries within the same region. Now, we make the exception here for Russia because Russia is the only country where we have 1 country in the region. So for that reason, it's an exception, and their 1 country is perfectly acceptable. The last rule that's very important here is that the number of organizations from program countries may not be higher than the number of organizations from partner countries. And that's, as Hermen mentioned, because the funding for this action is specifically targeted at the partner countries. So the exclusion criteria next. Exclusion criteria are linked to legal issues. So an applicant will be excluded from participating in calls for proposal if they're found to be in one of the situations that's described in Articles 136 to 141 of the Financial Regulation. So don't worry, you don't have to go and look up the EU Financial Regulation. These are all outlined on page 15 of the call document. And these include things like bankruptcy, in breach of social security obligations, guilty of grave professional misconduct, having committed fraud, etc. And how do we assess this? Well, in part A of the application form, you have to tick boxes declaring that you're not in one of these situations. And before grant signature, you may be obliged to submit documents as well. So now, on to selection criteria. So the selection criteria are based on operational capacity and financial capacity. For operational capacity, this means that the applicant must have stable and sufficient sources of funding to maintain its activity throughout the period during which the project will be carried out. And the grant, and the period for which the grant is awarded, and they must have sufficient capacity to co-fund. So this is checked after the award and during the grant agreement preparation stage. Important to note here, it doesn't apply to public organisations. And as for operational capacity, this will be assessed in parallel to the quality award criterion, which we'll come to later. It's assessed on the basis of competency and experience of the applicants and their project teams. So we use the description of relevant skills and experience of staff in part B of the application form, that is section 2.1.3, to assess this. Okay, now we're on to the really heavy part of the proposal because we're on to the award criteria. I say heavy, but I should stress that these are extremely important because we use, when I say we, our external experts who assess your proposals use these to fine-comb your proposal. They go through it and they look for evidence of these, all of these in your proposal. So it's not maybe the most lively part of the presentation, but it's extremely important to pay attention to these. So there are 4 criteria under award criteria. And to be considered for funding, applications must score at least 60 points out of 100 points in total. And for each of these 4 criteria, there's a minimum threshold that must also be reached for each one. So for relevance of the project, the minimum is 15 points out of 30. For quality of project design and implementation, the minimum points is 10 out of 20. For the quality of the partnership and cooperation arrangements, the minimum points is 10 out of 20. And for impact, the minimum points is 15 out of 30. You can find this table on page 19 of the COL document. So now I'm going to go through each of these 4 award criteria in detail. Sorry. Excuse me just one moment. Okay, so we're going to start with the relevance criteria. So each award criteria is divided into sub-criteria. I should state here that there is no individual points for each of these sub-criteria. However, you should try and address as many of these as possible that are relevant for your proposal in your proposal. And all of these ones under relevance are mentioned on page 17 of the COL document. So the first one is relevance. We want to see that the application is relevant to the chosen general and specific objectives of the COL. The project proposal is consistent with the requirements of the COL, and the proposal is clearly explained. Under consistency, the different components of the application must be coherent and consistent. So the application, it's based on an adequate analysis of challenges and needs. The objectives should be realistic and address issues relevant to the participant organisations and the direct and indirect target groups. And there should be evidence of the effectiveness of the proposed virtual exchange approach. And then under scaling up, the application should demonstrate the potential for scaling up its practice at different levels. So don't just think local, not just EU level, but we'd also like to see impact at regional and national level. And also think about how your project might be transferable to different sectors. The scaling up is likely to generate impact, not only at the level of different partner organisations, but could also do this at system or policy level. And the proposal should have the potential to develop mutual trust and enhance cross-border cooperation. And our last relevance criteria is European added value. And sometimes it surprises me, but often applications forget to mention this. Even though there is an obvious European added value, it must be explicitly mentioned in your proposal. So how will your application bring added value at EU level? Through the results should be results that are not only achieved at country level alone. And there should be potential for transferring results to other countries that are not involved in the project after the project. And the outcomes, they should have the potential to feed into relevant EU policy agendas. Okay, so that's the 4 award criteria. I'm going to move on now to the the first of the awards. I'm the first of the award criteria. I'm going to move on to the second of the award criteria now, which is the quality of project design and implementation. And so this information can be found on page 17 and 18 of the COL document, but it's heavy reading, so I'm going to go through it here, and you may have questions that you want to put on Slido if anything isn't clear. And the first one is that we're looking for, a strategic plan in your application. What is your strategy? Your strategy should be building on a feasibility analysis, and it should identify necessary activities for testing, adapting, and/or scaling up the virtual exchange practice in the new context of the project partnership. Secondly, the needs. The different needs of different partners should be identified and taken into account, and a clear concept of how these different needs will be managed and developed should be mentioned. The pedagogical approaches that are chosen should be in keeping with these different needs. Thirdly, structure. So the work programme should be clear and intelligible, and it should cover all project phases. Indicators of achievement and means of a verification should be included throughout and should be clearly defined. And then there's a section on management. So the project management plan should be sound. There should be adequate resources allocated for the different tasks, effective cooperation and decision-making processes in place, and these should be comprehensible for all stakeholders. Very important, the budget. The budget must show cost effectiveness and value for money. And there should be coherence between tasks, roles, and financial resources allocated to partners. So, in other words, we would like to see if a project is involved in 20% of activities, they normally should be receiving 20% of the grant. Financial management arrangements should also be clear and appropriate. And last but not least, evaluation. So we want to see specific measures for monitoring processes in place. Indicators of achievement and means of verification should be mentioned. Learning outcomes must be evaluated, and we're interested in knowing how the learning that takes place on the project will be recognised. There should be a clear quality assurance plan, which also covers project management adequately, and the monitoring strategy should include risk identification and a mitigating action plan. Okay, so we're halfway through these award criteria, and maybe just to take a little pause to mention that when our external experts are evaluating your proposal, so in your proposal, you're asked to write against each one of these. The reason I'm mentioning all the sub-criteria here is that what's written for the sub-criteria is exactly what the external experts are using when they're looking for evidence of that in your proposal. So you should be writing your proposal to address each of these, as many sub-criteria as are relevant for the objectives and activities of your project. So I'm going to look now at the third set of award criteria. That is the quality of partnership and the cooperation arrangements. So configuration, the partnership must be capable of ensuring full achievement of the project objectives. The consortium must have all necessary skills, expertise and experience in the areas covered by the project, and there should be adequate allocation of time and input among partners. Skills and competences of the partnership should be complementary. So every partner should be there for a reason, and they should be there because of the expertise they are bringing. In an ideal situation, there wouldn't be an overlapping of expertise, but all areas of expertise needed must be covered by the combined skills and experience of the consortium. Commitment. Each partner participating organisation should demonstrate full involvement corresponding to its capacities and specific areas of expertise. Cooperation. We want to see effective mechanisms to ensure coordination, decision-making and communication between the participating organisations and stakeholders. And last but not least, our fourth award criteria, which is impact, very important. So here we want to see a clear dissemination plan, which includes awareness raising and dissemination and communication strategy, which ensures that the project is reaching the relevant target groups, as well as general stakeholders and the public during the lifetime of the project. So this strategy must include plans for making any produced materials accessible through open licenses. In terms of exploitation, the application should demonstrate that the selected virtual exchange approaches can be successfully disseminated or scaled up, and that they create a wider impact and influence systemic change. and this should be clearly described. And last but not least, impact itself. So the foreseeable impact must be clearly defined and measures in place to ensure that the impact can not only be achieved, but also evaluated. For example, learning outcomes must be clearly defined and evaluated and reported on progress. The results of activities must be significant, and project outcomes must have the potential to support long-term changes. And I said last but not least, but I really mean it this time, this is for sustainability. There's no point in funding your project if it can't continue with the own resources of the organisation after the project finishes. So please tell us in your application what appropriate measures and resources you're going to put in place to ensure that these activities will have funding and will continue after the project lifetime. Okay, so that's quite a dense section. I'm just going to sum up with some tips on writing award criteria from experience on previous projects. So please try and be as concrete as you can in describing your objectives and activities. We use the acronym SMART for writing. That often helps if you bear that in mind when you're writing these sections. They should really be as concise and concrete as possible. Pay attention to all of the award criteria equally. Remember that scoring below the threshold in one award criteria automatically makes the project ineligible. The next point, please make sure to include quality indicators and means of verification, because we want to know how you're going to measure change and how you're going to be able to prove that change has taken place. And we notice in other actions that often impact is described in terms of participation in events. There's no point in participating in events unless there is a clear outcome. So we want to know what is going to change in terms of knowledge, behaviour and skills from participation in an event. Thank you very much for your presentation, your patience so far. I've now come to the second part of the presentation, which is on application forms. This is much shorter, and Eric is going to go into much more detail on the applications forms, but I'm just going to give you a quick run through of the 3 application forms so that you have the overview and you know what's expected. So there are 3 different parts to the application form. There is a part A, which contains general information, a part B, which is your technical description of project activities, and there's part C that we've included in this call, where we're looking for more detailed information on participating organisations and the numbers that are going to be participating in the call. Okay. So I'm going to start then with the, I see what's happening. There we go. I'm going to start with part A. So the e-form is online. When you go into the funding and tenders portal, which we call FTOP, when you go to submit application, you click on Edit Forms. When you click on Edit Forms, Part A will appear, and it has to be filled in online. So Eric will show you FTOP in a few minutes, but it has 3 parts. There's a general information part, there's a part on participants, and there is a part on budget. This is what the Part A budget section looks like. And I'm going to show you now part B, so you can also find this in FTOP. This is different. It's not an online form. It's actually a Word document that you download, you fill in, you save as PDF, and then you upload again into the system. And this is looking for your technical description. So here there are sections corresponding to the 4 award criteria I've just mentioned. And there's a section on work packages and estimated budget. This also has a budget section, and this is what the Part B budget section looks like. I think it's important to mention at this stage that you fill in the budget twice, once in Part A, once in Part B. It's very important that the same financial information appears in both. If there is a discrepancy, Part A takes precedence, but we would stress the importance of making sure that the budget information is coherent between Part A and Part B. And then we have the application form, which is Part C. Part C of the application form, rather. It's an online form. It looks something like this. This is only part of it, but it gives you an idea. It's mainly tick box, so quite quick to fill in. And it's a web page that you open in FTOP, and it asks you for information such as, policy lines that your project activities correspond to, number of participants, information on partners. Very important to stress here that the countries in which activities take place must be the same as the country of origin of partner organizations. For example, if an organization is if 2 organizations are based in Belgium and South Africa, and they're organizing virtual exchanges, participants cannot be based in the US, or they cannot be based in an EU country like Poland, for example, if there's no Polish partner in the project. So this is a very important point to stress, and we check this in Part C. So please make sure that you pay attention to that when you're filling in your Part C. And important to remember that you need to save this form. The information doesn't remain in the form, it needs to be saved. Okay, Eric is going to go into more detail on the actual FTOP in a few minutes, but just before I finish, just some general tips and things to bear in mind, some potential pitfalls that you might fall into. The first is that when you open FTOP, you will see that there are 2 what's called topics for this call. Topics are related to the funding mechanisms. Please make sure that the topic that you choose to fill in your application is the relevant one for the regions that your partners are based in. IPA, which is IPA, which is an EU funding mechanism for Western Balkans, is for projects with partners in Western Balkans only. And NDICI, which is an EU funding mechanism for many other regions outside the EU, is for projects with partners in Southern Mediterranean region or Eastern neighborhood region, or Russia, we say territory of Russia as recognized by international law, or Sub-Saharan Africa. So please ensure you fill in the correct one. Some other tips. The purpose of a project is to bring about change. So your proposal ultimately needs to tell us what change you intend to bring about and how you're going to measure the change using indicators, and how you will be able to demonstrate if change has been achieved using means of verification. It's not required to provide a log frame matrix and provide it as an annex. In fact, you can't upload it, even if you want to. But it might be useful when you're preparing your project proposal to use this as a tool to synthesize your project objectives and make sure that your indicators and your means of verification are relevant for them. It's not obligatory, not compulsory, this is just a tip. And lastly, all partners in partner countries, they must be legally established entities, and they must be able to receive funds via bank accounts. So pay attention to this when choosing partners. And I mentioned already the importance of getting the partnership composition, correct as an eligibility criteria, please pay particular attention to this in the context of this call. Last slide. The exchanges are virtual, as I mentioned, but participants must be based in the country of origin of the participant organisations. We have run a virtual exchange pilot project, as Herman mentioned, and would recommend that you have a read of the final impact report for inspiration, but don't forget to innovate. The word count is a maximum of 70 pages. We can't read any pages over 70. And last but not least, you will need at least 2 days to submit your application in eGrants, so please do not wait until the last day to submit, or you might be bitterly disappointed. Thank you very much for your time and your patience. I'm now going to hand you back to Eric, who's going to guide you through the FTOP system. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Rashin. So I will just wait a second, okay, and we'll go to the speaker lectern. Okay, so we're now going to look at the technical part of how to fill in an application. And this is in the funding and tender portal system. So just as a general reminder, all the links we're having in the presentations, which by the way, we will share with you afterwards, presentations and the videos will be available on the events webpage, which we use to announce this event. It will be updated and links will be there so that you can consult all the information. We are very much aware that this is quite a lot of information in one session, so that's why we make this available afterwards. So all the links are there. In my presentation, just to say, whenever there is a print screen, an image of any of the tools, these have been hyperlinked and are active in the PowerPoint presentation. So when you look afterwards at the PowerPoint and you're wondering where this can be found, the images are interactive to take you to the corresponding page of the tool I'm referring to. Okay, let's start. So the first thing I would like to point out is to make you aware of the fact that the application, that preparing an application is a process. Rashin was already very clear about this, referring to award criteria, eligibility criteria. They all have to be addressed and fit into your application. This is also true from a technical point of view. So there are some parts, before you can begin to actually write or copy-paste into the tool your application, there's some pre-requirements you have to fulfill. So you must have an EU login account, and I will show you how that works if you don't have one. If you have one, obviously, then you're already ready to start with that part. And very important, step 2, you must have what is called participant identification codes for each of your partners in the project before you are able to start. This is very important. People sometimes think, okay, I have the name of the organization, I can start filling out, but technically this is not possible. The system is set up that first you must have an EU login to get into the system, and then to create your e-form, you need the participant codes to launch it, and I will tell you in a moment why this is like so when I come to that slide. Then step 3 is, after you've passed the first 2 steps, step 3 is that you're going to the actual platform, which contains the e-form, which consists of the 3 parts Rashin just referred to, and you can work in there. And then once you're in the platform, you create your actual individual e-form, which is only accessible to you as an applicant. It cannot be shared. It's controlled through your EU login, so nobody else has access but you to the e-form. Then step 4, you fill out the application form, you run the validation once you think you're finalized, and then you submit, then you can submit your e-form. Okay, let me take you through the 4 steps in detail. So 1, you must have the EU login account, and then you can go to the participant register to check on your partners. So EU login, step 1. So as I said, so if you're in this presentation, when you download my presentation, this image is hyperlinked, which will take you to the exact page you're now seeing in the presentation. This is EU login. So what I just would like to point out also at this stage is that when you look on the left-hand side, in our applications on the left-hand side, you always have guidance and useful information. So in EU login, you look to the left-hand side, number 1, I've marked it with number 1. You have relevant information. If you're new to this, number 1 about EU login, it explains what EU login is, how it works, how you manage it, and how you can create an account. Also, always on the left-hand side, we have the information part with guidelines, but there's also in this part, it's always mentioned whom to contact, how to get help, okay? So if you're already familiar, you can have, you know that you click on contact and you will be directed to a web interface and you can mention your problem. If you're new to the system, then you see that there's help function at the very bottom. This explains how, what options there are. Also, if you can call a help desk directly, if there is a functional mailbox other to the web form. So all of this information is there. And you see, that there are different elements here. So that is meant to help you and to have quick access to certain documents if you're already familiar with the system. However, for all the systems, we always have a user guide. In this slide, this is indicated under point 2. So if you're new, we advise you to first look at the user guide because the user guide always is a comprehensive overview of all the functionality of the tool you are supposed to use, in this case, EU login. So if you're new, we advise you to use the user guide. Also, if you haven't used the system for a while, or it's a longer time ago, we also advise you to use the user guides. Obviously, in today's world, systems get updated regularly, and we absolutely make sure that user guides contain the latest information always. So that's just some tips how to go about it. So once you have, so if you need to create an account, that's number 4 on this slide. If you have an account, that's number 3 on this slide, you can simply log in, and then what happens is that EU login, if you need to go there to create an account, but if you already have an account, of course, then you can skip this step, because whenever you have an account and you want to connect to a Commission tool, then you click on the link and EU login will be initiated automatically. If you have an account, you want to go to the funding and tender portal, you click on the link of the funding and tender portal, automatically EU login will come up. So you don't have to go into EU login to join the tool. If you have an account, you click to join the tool and EU login will pop up to ask you for your credentials. So on this page, why do I still have 3? 3 is if you want to check your account, okay? So if you're preparing your application and you want to think, what is the detail of my profile for EU login, which email is in there, that can be important. If you have a new position, maybe a different email, but you still have your EU login, you want to maybe double check and make sure that your profile information is correct in here. Good. And then another thing is point 5. So on the top right-hand corner, on Commission tools and websites, we always have, if the tool or the page exists in other languages, this is always on the top right-hand side corner of Commission tools and websites. So you can switch the language. So if you're not familiar with the English terminology or you have a doubt, you can quickly change the language. The application will stay on the same page, but you will have the introduction to EU login in Bulgarian, Portuguese, Irish, German, Dutch, what have you. All the languages are there. All right, that's EU login. So then step 2, this was the participant code you need. So what is very important here is that you must have a participant identification code for each and every single organization in your partnership. Sometimes when you're in contact with your partners, you ask them, do you have this code? Yes, I have it, and they provide something, and that's it. So what is very important is that this is the first step before your form is created, because why do we ask you to provide these codes beforehand? It's because the code will identify the organization you will be including in your application, and the data will be pulled out of our database into your form. And that's why you need the PIC beforehand, because you cannot create a form with the data which is already present in our systems if you're not using the PICs, if you don't call up these organizations like so. So it doesn't help to put a name or a title. This won't work. You must have this code for each and every one of your partners to be able to launch the process. So it's very important to prepare this. We advise you to do this when you have your full partnership. You add the PIC code, you search as is indicated on this slide, you search for the PIC, use the code, it's a 9-digit number, use the code, enter it to see that it's correct. We advise you to search with the code because if you enter names of organizations, often this doesn't work because it might call up legal entities of the organization which are in the system. So that's why it's important to use the PIC also as an applicant. Like that you can check that you have the correct data for a given partner. If one of your partners doesn't have a PIC yet, that's part B on this slide, then they need to register. So that's also important. That's why you need to prepare. You as an applicant can of course not create an organization on behalf of somebody else because access to organization data is regulated quite strictly and can only be accessed by the responsible person or identified as such in any organization. The system has automatic controls on this of name of the coordinator of organizations, the email, so to avoid that other people create something which isn't their own organization. So that's very important. If you're in contact with your partners, you know, oh, this is a new partner. Do you have a participant identification code? No, then they have to register. Also very important, we know that this is also a process with several steps. To start your application, you only need the code. So if a partner is new, ask that partner to register. To get the code, the organization in the system does not yet have to be validated. So it suffices that they go and register, they will be allocated a code, and then you can proceed with your application while they can in all peace and quiet continue with the validation. So a code suffices, it doesn't have to be validated yet. So then we're ready. We have the EU login, we have the PIC codes, the codes for all of our partners, and we're ready for step 3. So we go into the funding and tender portal to start the process. So you can see that in comparison to the previous slide, here we were in the section, in the top section, big in red, how to participate. So that was the second part on this slide. Now we're on part where the 1 is, we search for funding and tenders, okay? So 1 was to get how to participate, that was EU login PIC, and then number 2 is search for funding opportunities, and we will help you to find the call. This is sometimes not very, very obvious because this tool is used by all of the Commission. So there are many, 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 many funding opportunities in this tool because all the services or most of the services of the Commission are now using this tool. It's a central tool for applying for funding, so there are many calls in this. So we provide you a little shortcut, let's say, to make sure that you find our call correctly in this tool. Because also you have to be aware that you're applying for funding under the 2021 call. The 2022 call will also become available in this system, so it's very important to pay attention to detail like this. As you can see in the slide under number 2, what I propose here is to use the call reference. This is called the call reference, so not the name of the call, but use this call reference. So it's Erasmus-edu-2021-VRT and then for exchange. If you enter this reference in this field, then you will get to our call. And to make the search a bit quicker, number 3, we make sure that only open calls is selected, because if you leave the other one, by default, all 3 options are selected. That can take a long time to run this search, because it will go through all the database, even closed calls and archive. So, number 1, you're in the search function. Number 2, you enter the reference of the call. Number 3, you limit to open calls, and then you get as a result what is under number 4. This is first white. When you hit the search at the bottom of the page, it's not in the print screen, it's at the bottom of the page, search, then you get this result. Now what you see is that there are 2 options, and Russian explained this already very well. So this is extremely important to be sure that you understand the difference between those 2. Russian explained that in terms of content. It's also explained in the call. Here I'm just pointing out that there are 2, and you have to make sure that you're on the right one. Why? Because this will create the form for, if you click, it will create the form for either of the 2. If you make a mistake, then you cannot change this, okay? You cannot change this, so once you've launched your form for either of the 2, it's created for either of the 2, and then that cannot be corrected other than restarting again an application form, which is to be avoided because it causes confusion for you, it causes confusion for us. So make sure that you understand the difference between the 2, and that when you're in the funding and tender portal, that you click on the right one, that the right form will be created. Yeah. So in the call, just to tell you, in the call, these 2 options are called topic. So that makes it easier. If you're in the PDF version of the form, you can do a find. It goes quickly. If you put in the word topic, you will get in the call to this section where this is explained. Very important. All right. So this is, again, a summary. So once you are in the right topic, so here I did the search, under 3 I entered the code, under 4 I limited to open calls only, then I decide I need to have the second topic, number 5, I click on the second topic. Once I did that and I search under 6, I get the result again, okay? So when I click on that, I get the result. I can double check that I have the right one, that I have the right topic under 6, and then I can launch to create my application, and then it's created. All right, so once you create, this is what happens. So the first page of the call will open, and you see in red on top, yes, I have the right topic. I can check that this is correct. Also on the very right-hand side, I can see the same information, and I have some other information, yes, with which I can make sure I'm the right one. So I have the opening date, it's 2021. I have the deadline mentioned there, and that it's under Erasmus plus 2021, so we're fine. Now again, I told you, in all our tools, the help section is to the left. So if we go to the left on this page, we have nicely in order all the functions there mentioned, which are in support of, which provide information in support of your application. So we see, I need to take this here. So we see under number 1 and 2, this is related to the call, and you have information on that. But there's also information on the submission process and also how to get to the call information. And what is now here important is that the call information is not linked to a published call like in the PDF, but it's in the system. So that's very important. In the past, we used to have, this is a specific call not covered by the program guide as explained by Rushin. So we're in a specific call. So in the past, we used to have a sort of page where all the call documentation was published. This is different in this system here. All the information is inside the system, so that's why you need to use this on the left-hand side to navigate you through the information of the call itself. And as you can see, there's also, an indication again how to get support, which is twofold. The support, if you have a technical issue, then there is a functional mailbox for technical issues, and you can call a technical help desk also. And for the call for all that is related to content, we have a functional mailbox of the agency. I'm explaining this because this distinction is extremely important. Don't put technical questions together with content questions in the mail to us, because technical questions are dealt with by the technical help desk, and we don't have, at the agency, it's a commission tool, so we don't have access to the tool as such, so we cannot do anything on your behalf. So whenever you have a technical problem or a technical question, you need to address that to the technical help desk of the tool, as is indicated here under the help section. And if you have a content question, then you address that to the functional mailbox of the agency as published in the call text. So that's very important there. Okay, then we go in. We have selected now. We can navigate to see the information available. I forgot. You can see also that there is a partner search. So if you are missing a partner or you want to see which other partners might be available, you can use the partner search to use in the tool. The tool comprises all the organizations which have registered with us, so there are quite a few, so this is also something which might be of interest. So now we actually launched the application. We've taken note of all the information, we're ready. So here you need, under number 1, to confirm your choice. So you click this tick box, that you're applying under Erasmus, and then number 2, you start the process. And again, you can see, the get help and everything is available for each screen. Which reminds me that when you're on a certain page and something is not clear or something is not working correctly, when you do a technical help request by email or also even by phone, try to collect as much information and as detailed as possible. So we always advise you to take a print screen especially when there's an error message, because, as I said, the tool is used throughout the commission. So telling the help desk, I'm on this and this page, can you please have a look, won't help, because at the help desk they're not aware of all the calls. So it's very important also when you contact the help desk, the reference I gave to search the call, for them it's also very helpful to be aware under which call you're actually applying, because each call has different specifications and they're linked to that are different pages in the application system, so it's not all the same. So that's very important, print screen and call reference when you contact the technical help desk. All right. So you see again, sometimes in the system, although you've logged in the beginning, for certain parts, we request again a confirmation of your login credentials. Why do we do this? This is to make sure, this is for your security, that we can confirm that you are the one applying and that the data you've called up is in the framework of your application and that you are really the identified applicant. Okay, So don't worry, it's not, you haven't, if this happens, it doesn't mean that you have lost connectivity, it simply means that you confirm your credentials. All right, so very briefly, we're getting there nearly. So as we can see, we have once you create your application, that's step 4, remember, then we're really in the nitty-gritty of the tool. So on top, you see where you are in the application process. So on purpose, I chose a test application I've been working on, which is already at step 2, not at the very beginning. So whenever you have done steps, then they appear in green. So as in the presentation, we did the EU login and we did the creation. So the first 2 steps were done, and now under step 2, 3, 4, and 5, we fill in the application form in turns. Very important for you to know is that, you know, that's sequential. So at the beginning, you cannot jump between the stages. So you need to initiate them and provide some information for each of the stages to be able to advance. It doesn't have to be completely complete. Once you've initiated a stage and you've filled in certain information, then you can continue. And this is important to know. So you can save a draft, you can save drafts and come back to your application. So there's no need whatsoever to do this in one go. This is open to you. You decide what you prefer. Some applicants, they prepare everything very well, and then they fill in the e-form in one go. They have written parts pre-prepared in Word. And then they do it in one go. But sometimes you realize while you're filling in the e-form, the deadline is only in February, so there's a lot of time. Sometimes there are some changes, you know, a partner drops out and you need to add another one. No problem. This is possible in the form, you know, when you go in the form to the list of the partners. It's not at the beginning because you have created the form, but in the form itself, you can go to the list, for instance, of the partnership, select a partner, remove the partner, and then there's a button to add a partner. So once your form is created, you can still change everything, including the partnership data, obviously the parts you need to attach, what Russian already pointed out very well, the descriptive part of your project. This is an attachment, so that is standalone. You first fill it in, you save it on your laptop or on your computer, and then you upload it into the system, and that's also on this page. So also, once you've uploaded something and your application is in draft, you can go to the list of attachments, remove an attachment, and upload a new one. So this is perfectly possible. So what is very important is, you know, draft works, but also when you're working in the application, sometimes we work for a longer time. There's an automatic save normally, but, you know, it's not always our system at fault. It depends also what kind of connection you have. A lot of people nowadays, because of lockdown or partial lockdown, work with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is not always the most stable connection, so we advise you, you know, make sure that on each page you know where the save button is. This is always a tricky part. On this screen we don't see the save button. Why? Because save buttons by definition are at the bottom of the page, so you need to scroll down and save. Do that regularly, like that you're safe. So another thing is you will see when you like to work with drafts, I, for instance, do. When I did the testing, I work with drafts. So you will see that this is a web-based application. So as soon as you've created your form, if it's in draft, you will see that the address in your browser will change and it will have the reference number. When you create an application, an automatic email will be sent to you, and the email will be used. The email the system uses is the email you have either in your EU login, or if in your application you specify contact person under the applicant organization, this email will be used. So as mentioned before, make sure that the emails you're using are correct. And also an important part, for EU login, the system won't allow you to use a functional mailbox, okay? Because as I said, your profile is linked to an individual, so it must be an individual email, not a functional mailbox. So, you will get a confirmation email, and in this confirmation email, you will also have a direct link to your application. But as I said, it's also very easy. It's web-based, so you will see the address once you've launched your application, the address in the browser changes. So you can put this in your favorites like that. You have it immediately, and you don't have to go and search in Outlook for an email. Save it as a favorite. When you click on it, you're back in your application directly. And it will open to the exact page you were when you saved that as a favorite. So that's also very handy. Okay, so important here in terms of the system, you already see that there are a number of numbers on this slide. I'm not taking you through all the stages because we're focusing on key elements, because if I were to take you through all the stages of the actual e-form, it would take much too long. So I'm pointing out key points. And what is very important is that if you're new to the system, the tip remains, get the guide, and in the final slide, I have an overview of all the links so that you can easily access all the tools I'm mentioning in this presentation, plus where to find information. Get the guide, I would print it out and read it carefully to make sure, that you have each step covered, and that you know how to get to things, how to upload correctly, how to save a draft correctly. And also, whenever you fill something in, that's nice in this tool. Validation is not a final thing. That's a very nice tip. If you fill something in one page, when you scroll down in the application, you can go to the save, but next to the save is always the validation button, and you can validate at any moment in time to see a list will appear of all the mistakes or missing data or still missing data, and you can see where you are. So this is a great tool to check how far you are. I mean, if you think, I'm sort of finished, I just need this, hit the validation bar to make sure that this is the only element still missing. Yeah, so that's very nice. Or you feel you're in step 3 and you think, I've filled out step 3 completely, this is fine, this is for me ready to finalize. You can hit the validation button to see that you haven't overlooked something. I'm giving this tip because sometimes, in the e-form, as Russian also pointed out, they're hyperlinked parts. So we have a double system. One part is that you get these kind of screens like this one, where you fill out. But for instance, the budget table and other information on the partnership, that's not a web-based interface, so not a web page, but a page generated from the database which appears, and so the link to that information is different. So you will see that because you will not have a browser address for that part. You will have to access those pages through the buttons on the page you see here. So there again, you have the save button, save regularly, but in each part, also in those parts, you have the possibility to validate once you've filled that in and saved. So very useful. Okay, so here again, just to mention, when you've, I wanted to mention part 6, so point 6 in green, that is, you can see again your reference code. So also this is handy, when you have this information on the page, when you do take a print screen of an error message, make sure that your print screen includes this information, then you don't have to write it in your email because it will be visible in your print screen because the information is on this page. Sometimes it's handy, to when you go through the process for key pages, to take print screens just to keep them for yourself, so that if you have a technical error, sometimes we lose connectivity and then it's impossible to take a print screen, but then you can refer to a previous print screen. All right, number 9, these were the downloads which Russian mentioned. Here I want to mention that the downloads will be zipped up in a zip7 file and will go to the default download folder on your PC. That's important to know because, you know, sometimes now this is configured in our browsers automatically. We click on download and then we don't find the document. So automatically the system, our system is programmed like that. It will check your browser and will send this download directly to the default location of your browser. So that's, you don't have to hit download again and again and again if it's not visible. Just check in your browser what the default download location is, and then you will see a zip file. You open the zip file and you can easily extract by dragging and dropping the templates which are there for you to use. These you save on your laptop and then to be filled in. Obviously, you know, for the descriptive part, if you have partners who have specific knowledge in certain areas for the, let's say, pedagogical approach or they're very specific on the knowledge of their partnership, you're free to share the downloaded templates and ask your partners to fill them in. That's up to you how you want to work with your partners and how to organize it. Let them fill it in, or you ask them this information and you paste copy afterwards. All right, and number 10 again, support and help. There you see it. So at the bottom of the page, it's even mentioned. So this is the technical help desk. So at the bottom left side, at the bottom, this is the technical help desk. So first an email. So if you have a technical problem, you know, they normally need some evidence. So normally email is the best way to do. That you can, of course, also phone them if you need immediate help. And if there is something which isn't immediately solved when you call them, we advise you to follow up with an email so that there is a track record of the problems you have. Now here, just one very important point about technical problems. You know, I particularly liked Russian's tip, you know, make sure that you have the time to apply. And she said 2 days, and I like that very much because I used to say 1 day, but now I go with 2 days by my colleague Russian. Make sure, really, make sure, you know, that everything is there, ready, and, you know, just say to yourself, it's not the 22nd, it's the 20th, like that. If there is any problem, then you have time to do it. I would just like to inform you, that people sometimes last minute, they contacted us and then they say there was a technical problem and I couldn't submit. I just have to point out here that, you know, the system has a log frame and we can see exactly what happened. So we can see when you hit submit, we can see when you validated your form for the last time and when you submit it. And this will be checked because we treat everybody equally. So if you can't submit last minute or last second even, you know, and you say there was a technical problem, we will check that. And I have to inform you that we only accept technical problems from our side. So if for any reason you have a weak Wi-Fi, you know, and submission is not very heavy, but it has impact on connectivity. That's what we always notice also during our testing. So, you know, when you submit, we advise have a stable connection. Ethernet is more stable than Wi-Fi. Make sure, you know, from your own experience, if you're working from home and you continuously notice that when you're in online meetings that the connection for you is not that stable, then we advise, you know, when you do submission, make sure that you do it timely and from the most stable connection you can do it from. So that's very important. I'm just pointing this out because, you know, just not being able to submit doesn't mean that there's a problem with our system and that we perform a check to make sure, you know, that this is looked at in detail and that we can establish what exactly happened. Therefore, also, if nevertheless, you know, you encounter some problems just before, it's very important that from your end also, we will check from our end, but from your end, we will also ask you to provide evidence. So again, screenshots are important. If you contact the help desk, take note when you contacted that, because again, that we have to check, so we also need this information. Okay, but rest assured, the system is good, and In terms of submission, for the last calls, there were not many issues in terms of the functionality of our system. We did substantial testing ourselves, and personally, all my test submissions went very well. And just to conclude the 4 steps, the E-form, Part A, Part B, Part C, I refer here to the presentation of Russian. All of these 3 parts are in the 4 steps I mentioned in step 4. So that's important in step 3 and 4, sorry. That's important to make sure that when you start doing this, that you have the information. And then I come to the useful links part. Again, in the presentations which will be made available, you will have easy access. So there's the link how to participate for EU login. Then there is the funding and tender portal online manual, very important. You know, read it from A to Z before you start. Like that, you familiarize yourself with what is expected. It's a step-by-step manual, and the presentation I've been giving is in parallel with the steps which are there. And then, very nice, there's a new guide. So if you've never worked with the portal, you know, before you go to the online manual, you might want to start with the manual for beginners, because it's a more comprehensive overview. Also, if you haven't used the tool for some time, this is a very nice new guide, comprehensive overview of what is expected, what needs to be done, and also can prepare you what you need to collect and do in the system. Then we have the support section again. So this is the link to the help desk, whom to contact, and very nice. Also now, this is relatively new. There are a number of video tutorials. So for people who are used to look things up in the internet and look at videos instead of reading user guides, there you can find some very useful videos. Okay, and then there's also the short guide for the submission system. So there you go. And at the bottom, I already mentioned it, is the events page of the agency. So that is very useful. We will update this in a few days. It will contain an overview of all the videos and all the presentations. And we've recently published also a nice flyer. So if you have new partners, this kind of information is also nice to share with your partnership to give them an impression what we're looking for and what this is about. All right. Thank you very much. So now I have the honor to switch, to announce my colleague for the financial aspects, Alina Filimon. So please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon. The aim of this presentation is to, in one hand, to help you for the preparation of the financial part of the application form, and on the other hand, to ensure that even before applying, you are aware of the main financial issues that you will have to manage in case that your project will be selected for funding. First of all, I would like to stress that the cost will not be automatically be eligible just because they were foreseen in the budget. The cost must be eligible and actually incurred. And we will see later on the main eligibility conditions. The duration of the project is maximum 36 months, but if necessary, it could be amended. And for this, you will have to submit somewhere over the implementation an amendment request. Then I would like to stress as well that this is a co-financing project. So you have to be able to prove that you are able to contribute your share to the project, which is 5%. And for this, you have to have stable and sufficient resources. The Commission's contribution can be maximum 95% of the eligible costs. The maximum amount of the grant is 500,000 euros, but, for example, you can request only 400,000. What is important to know already is that under no circumstances the amount of 400,000 that I used for my example can be increased. So once you apply for an amount of the grant, once you are selected, let's say, if you are awarded 400,000 euros, you will have to stick to this amount, and you cannot have any other complementary funding. Regarding the payment arrangements, you will have a first pre-financing of 40% of the amount of the grant awarded, then one of more further pre-financings, and in the end, if the final amount of the grant will be less than the total pre-financing received, you will have to reimburse the difference. There are three types of financing for this type of action. The actual cost incurred, then you have unit costs and the flat rate for indirect costs. For some type of, for some budget categories, you might have, for example, for personnel, you have actual costs in the case of employees and seconded persons, but you have as well other personal categories like SME owners. This is less likely to happen, but in case that you will have it, you have to be aware that it's possible. And then you have unit costs for volunteers. To come back to the actual costs, for personnel and employees and seconded persons, you have calculation methods which are very well detailed in the Annotated grant agreement. You have precise calculations. Then you might have subcontracted for the project tasks that are needed to be implemented but cannot be carried out by your partnership, so you have to outsource them. Then in the category purchase, you might have equipment. For the equipment, it's important to keep in mind that you not necessarily can claim the whole amount, the whole cost of an equipment, because there are international rules and national rules for depreciation of the equipments, and you will have to claim only the depreciation. For example, if you have an equipment with a lifetime of 5 years, but your project has a lifetime of 3 years only, you will have to include in the cost only the depreciation corresponding to the 3 years of the duration of the lifetime of the equipment that overlap with the duration of the project. For the VAT, I just would like to stress that you can claim only the non-deductible VAT. There might be other actual costs like communication costs for presenting the project on the participant's website, which is eligible. But if you want to create a separate project website, this is not possible and the cost will be ineligible. In-kind contributions are allowed, but only for free and cannot be eligible cost. So you cannot declare any cost under in-kind contributions. Regarding unit cost, you have the possibility to claim unit cost for travel, for accommodation, and for subsistence. And you can find all this, the detailed information on this at the footnote 27, page 21 of the call for proposals. It's a link to a commission's decision. Then you have the same unit cost as well for personal SME owner natural persons category. You have as well the link to this unit cost. The presentation will be available on our website, so you will be able to access it afterwards. And you have unit cost for volunteers, again in the personal category. There are many, many details, and it's a very complicated category, I would say. So if you will have the situation, you will really have to enter into details. We don't have time now. You would need a special presentation only for volunteers, I think. And the last budget category, the last form of financing, is the flat rate for indirect costs, which is 7% on the total eligible costs. Anytime during the lifetime of your project, and even after the end of the project, 5 years after the payment of the balance, you might be audited by the agency, by external auditors, or by the European Court of Auditors. So you have to keep all the relevant supporting documents at least 5 years after the balance payment. The eligibility conditions depend on the form of financing. So if you have actual cost incurred or unit cost or flat rate, the conditions are slightly different. As I said previously, you have to ensure that you foresee in the budget all the costs, but they will become eligible only if they are actually incurred over the period indicated in the grant agreement. The cost must be necessary for the actions, they must be identifiable and verifiable in the accounting, must comply with the national law, and must be reasonable and justified in the light of the principle of sound financial management, which means efficiency, economy, and effectiveness. It would be interesting to see it. If you would like to see what it means, you can find it in the EU Financial Regulation, which is available online. For the unit cost, the eligibility conditions are, again, to be foreseen in the budget, to be actually used or produced by the beneficiary in the period indicated in the grant agreement. They must be necessary for the implementation of the action, and the number of units must be identifiable and verifiable in accounting. To give an example, if you want to claim, for example, accommodation costs, you will have to keep the hotel invoice, and there we have to see the number of units, which is the number of hotel nights. In this case, the number of units is the number of nights spent at the hotel. For the flat rate for indirect costs, apart that it has to be foreseen in the budget, it is totally depending on the eligible costs. So you don't have a specific supporting document for the flat rate. You just need to ensure that the eligible costs to which you apply it are correctly calculated, and they occur over the period indicated in the grant agreement. Now we come to the budget form, and my advice would be, before touching any budget form, before filling in any amounts, to finalize your work plan. So you have to have really a very, very clear image of what would you like to do before starting to fill in the amounts in the budget to see what are the resources that you need to fulfill these actions. And once your work plan is finalized, where you know exactly what would you like to do, when would you like to do, with whom you would like to do, then you can start filling in the budget form in part B. First, I will now make a little comparison between the two budget forms. So you will see that there are some similarities, but there are some differences. Regarding the cost, the categories are the same in part A and in part B. It's just that in part B you can go, and I think you have to go more in detail. In part B, you have to put your unit cost in case that you claim travel, accommodation, subsistence. You have to put it there, and in this part B, you will be able to insert more columns if needed, and I think it's going to be needed. Because for personal, for example, we have seen already that you have 4 possible categories, so you will have to have 4 personal columns, maybe, or 2 columns, and in each column, details, in order to allow us to see that you correctly calculated your total cost. So once you finalize the part B, the calculations in part B, you have to take only the totals and to put totals per beneficiary, of course, and to put it in part A. The part A is, has the complete overview of your grant. Budget form part B stops at total cost, which are total eligible costs in part A. So the total cost that you will have at the end in the budget for part B must match the total eligible cost that you have in part A. And then in addition, in part A, you have the funding rate, which is 95%. You have the maximum amount of the contribution and the request and contribution, which will allow you to identify the maximum grant amount. Yes, something important to say is that even in the budget form, both budget forms, part A and part B, you have financial support to third parties. There is no such a cost category foreseen for this action. So this column is there just to remind you that it has to be 0. So if you see that you claim something there, we will have, unfortunately, to cut it because it's not an eligible category. Financial support to third parties. Okay, I end with the presentation of the budget tables, but repeating once again, please ensure that these 2 tables match. Regarding the unit costs to be filled in part B of the budget, in the part B of the application form, you have a unit cost for travel which is depending on the distance. And so the first step, when you want to calculate travel cost, you have to identify correctly your distance. Previously, we have seen where you can find it in footnote 27 of the call for proposals. So you have to identify your distance, and then you go to the tables. And don't worry, you will not have to use a microscope for these tables because you will find all of them in this commission's decision. So this is just to give you an overview of the different tables. You have the tables are structured depending on the type of transport, by air or rail or combine. Then on intra-member states transport, inter-member states transport, and finally outermost regions and OCTAs. What is important to stress regarding the unit cost for travel is that it is for return trips. So once you have identified your distance, you go in the relevant table and you look to the unit cost. For example, if you have a distance of 1,300 kilometers, you will be able to claim 230 euros in the first table. If your distance is more than 400 kilometers and it's, let's say, a rail travel. And you don't have to multiply by 2 this unit cost. So you just calculate it once, and it's supposed these 230 euros are supposed to cover both trips, ongoing and incoming, outgoing and incoming. Then you have unit cost for accommodation and subsistence. This is, again, in footnote 27 in the call for proposals. And there you will find quite a long table. I didn't put it here because there were too many countries. But it's just important for you to keep in mind that you have a separate unit cost for accommodation and for subsistence. And just in case that you will not find the country for which you want to calculate it in the table, because it's quite a long table, as I said, but not all the countries in the world are covered by this table, and only in case that you will not find your country in this table, you will be allowed to use a real cost and not a unit cost. In all the other situations, for all the countries that are foreseen in the table, you have to use the unit costs. Now, in the happy case that you will be selected, which I wish you, you will have, at the end of the project, we'll have to calculate the final amount of the grant, and this will be done in 4 steps. First, the 95% of co-financing will be applied to the total eligible costs. Then we will have to apply the maximum grant amount as per grant agreement. So if it was 400,000, and as in my example, and the 95% of co-financing leads to an amount of 420,000 euros. The 2,000 euros which are exceeding the maximum amount per grant agreement will be ineligible. Then there might be other reductions for no-profit rule, and reductions due to substantial errors, irregularities, or let's hope it will never happen, fraud, or due to serious breach of obligations. So if you really don't respect your contractual obligations and you don't carry out the actions that you are supposed to carry out as indicated in the application form. Finally, I would like to give you some tips that will be necessary in case that your application is going to be selected and you will get a grant agreement. You have to check, again, of course, you have to keep an eye on the cost declares all over the implementation, but at the end, you will have to check the declared cost in the final report against the accountancy recordings, against the bookkeeping. Then you will have to keep all the documents, as I said previously, for 5 years after the end of the project, and the end of the project is officially declared by the Commission the moment when the final payment is done. So the final payment might be done by us or by you. So by final payment of the balance, we mean as well the payment of the debit note by you to the Commission in case that the final amount of the grant will be inferior to the pre-financings paid. And finally, the last tip, it would be better to register the cost analytically per project. So your accountant will understand. Your accountant will understand what we mean by this. So try to keep close somebody with strong financial and accountancy skills since the application phase and during the whole duration of the project. Because from past experiences, we know that when somebody with accountancy and financial knowledge is involved in a project, the financial management is better. Of course, for everybody, his skills. Then before applying for the grant, please read carefully the call for proposals, the annotated grant agreement, and all the other documents available on the portal. And then, in case that you are selected, please read again carefully the grant agreement, because then you will find a little bit more clear information, more clear in the sense that there will be only the information related to this type of grant. The annotated grant agreement, it's referring to other types of type of grants as well. So when you read it, you will first have to read the call for proposals, and then to identify the budget items and the elements that are in the call for proposals, and then to look for it in the annotated grant agreement, when you will find much more details. Thank you very much, and I wish you good luck for your application, and we are now taking a break of half an hour.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll just take off my mask. Okay, thank you very much, Alina, for this presentation. Just to mention that Alina made some reference to when you do get selected and the grant agreement and other aspects of financial management, which are a bit related when you actually do get a grant agreement. I just would like to point out that we did this on purpose just to demonstrate the difference a bit between the lump sum system, which is now being implemented in Erasmus+, and the fact that here we have a real cost budget with some flat rate application, as was well explained by Alina. So that is very important. And I just would like to reiterate in this respect, that Alina, because she was referring to the grant agreement and she was explaining a bit supporting documents which are required from you once you have a grant agreement, again, to point out a bit the differences between what is expected and how we work in real cost in comparison to lump sum. Of course, these supporting documents, all of them, which were mentioned in her presentation, are solely and only necessary once you do have a grant. I'm just mentioning this because also coming back to what Rashin said, she mentioned the log frame, a very, very useful tool, but please be aware that the attachments in the application form are really limited to what is mentioned in the application form, and that you shouldn't attach or try to attach anything else, because anyway it won't be given to the experts and therefore doesn't belong in your application. Now we're ready to go for the break. We have originally 30 minutes, but we will be back at. Oh no, we can do 30 minutes. So we will be back in 30 minutes, which is at 35 past 4. So 16:35, we will be back to answer questions. All your questions you put in Slido, and as pointed out previously, we take questions from all 4 sections. Okay, thank you, and see you in 30 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We all had a good break, I hope. It gave us time to go through the questions which were submitted on Slido by you. As said before, you can still continue to do so while we're in the question and answer session, and also a bit afterwards if there's some burning issue you still want to raise. So off we go. We will start first with the financial questions, and then we will continue afterwards with how to apply, questions on how to apply. There were quite a few. So first I will give the floor again to Alina, our financial expert. Alina, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. The first question refers to the co-financing percentage. And this is 95%. So the share of the Commission is 95% of the total eligible costs. Then we have a question on the purchase costs, and those costs are limited in scope but necessary for the implementation of a project. And they relate to costs such as travel, accommodation and subsistence, depreciation of equipments, and other goods, work or services. If they are not limited in scope, they fall under the category subcontracting costs. If the consortium contracts an organization that implements substantial parts of the activities of a project, this will be not a purchase cost anymore, but subcontracting. Example, for the organization of a conference. The next question, are there maximums for travel and subsistence costs? There are no maximums, but unit costs. There are unit costs for travel and subsistence that can be found at page 21 of the call for proposals in the footnote number 27, where is a link to a Commission's decision which contains a distance calculator, 4 tables regarding the unit cost for travel, and a table regarding the unit cost for accommodation and the unit cost for subsistence. What is the type of eligible expenditures? This action will be financed by actual cost, unit cost eventually, and a flat rate of 7%. In order to have a clear picture of all the eligible expenditure, please read carefully the call for proposals, identify the eligible types of costs for this action, and then find more details in the annotated grant agreement. So first, refer to the call for proposals, identify the eligible cost, and then look for more details in the annotated grant agreement. Next question. Would you please illustrate how subcontractors will be involved? This depends on your project. You may have subcontractors to implement part of a project, but in any case, a subcontractor cannot run the whole project. And only tasks that cannot be carried out by the consortium should be subcontracted. The subcontracting activities must be clearly indicated in the application form, including in the budget form. There is another question on travel cost. Travel costs are mentioned as eligible expenditures for if in the guide. Could you explain what kind of travel could be foreseen for virtual exchanges? Yes, virtual exchanges is about online exchanges, but some travels might be necessary. For conferences, for example, to manage the consortium, to allow a member of the consortium to meet people in reality. Not only virtually, for example, you might attend the kickoff meeting in Brussels, and this example is clearly indicated in the call for proposals. So for the kickoff meeting, you can send to Brussels maximum 2 persons, and each person can have 1 night of accommodation, and so on. So travel costs might occur even in the case of virtual exchanges, but it's not compulsory. It depends on the organization of your consortium. Next question is regarding the total budget. Is the total budget of 500,000 euros plus 5% co-funding, or 500,000 euros, the 500,000 euros including the 5% co-funding? So the maximum of 500,000 euros refers to the 95% of Commission's co-financing share. So you have the total amount, which might be higher of 500,000 euros. You apply 95%, and only this amount will be eligible. But if the 95% of the total eligible costs are 500,000 euros, yes, you have 500,000 euros eligible. And the last question, where can the annotated grant agreement be found? And this is available on the Funding and Tenders portal in the reference documents. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alina. So these were the financial questions submitted to us. So I will immediately pass on the floor to Rushin, who will take questions on how to apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And it's great to see such active participation. The Commission is using Teams for other activities, which tend to be more interactive in that we can see the participants and speak more directly with them. We don't have Teams infrastructure for such large audiences that attend info days as of yet, but I know the agency is working on it, and we do hope to put that in place in the future. But it's great to see so many questions, because it reassures us that there are lots and lots of people listening out there, and some excellent questions have been raised. So I'll try my best now to answer them for you. So we have a question: is it correct that one organisation can submit 2 proposals as lead applicant, one for each of the 2 topics? And above this is allowed to submit proposals for the 2 topics as a project partner with no limitation. So yes, in principle, it is possible to submit as lead partner for these 2 topics. However, if you are putting in multiple applications, we would ask you to ensure that your organisation has the operational capacity to implement several projects at the same time. And secondly, that there is no double funding of activities. So the projects in which you're involved cannot have the same activities, because that would mean that the organisation was being funded twice for these activities. So that's not possible. Next question. On page 10 in the call document, it's stated CVs of core project team not applicable. On page 15, there are mentioned profiles, qualifications and experience of staff responsible. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you request no CVs in the annex and staff profiles mentioned on page 15 in the call document, but these are covered in point 2.1.3. Okay, so I think there the question is why no CVs? And it's true, we don't request CVs. They cannot be uploaded as annexes to this call. However, the operational capacity must be explained thoroughly under point 2.1.3 of Part B, which is entitled Project, Teams, Staff and Experts. Another question. I and my colleagues were wondering that will there be a second round of applications in Erasmus Plus virtual exchanges and higher education and youth in autumn, since in the recently published Erasmus Plus applications 2022, it's mentioned that the deadline for applications for this action would be on the 20th of September 2022. However, the call that's currently opened in the Funding and Tenders portal will close on the 22nd of February 2022. This is a very good question because indeed we have published the 2021 call on the Funding and Tenders portal, and it has a deadline of February, as we mentioned earlier. But as Eric mentioned in his presentation, please pay attention in FTOP, because in FTOP there is the 2022 call, which has already been published there because it's part of the programme guide. So it's been published with all the other relevant actions of the programme guide. However, it's published, but it's not open for submission until next March. So please be careful when you're in FTOP that you choose the 2021 call. That's very, very important. Okay. Another question, we were wondering if there are any promotion materials available for this call. We have created a flyer that's available on the info page on the EACEA website, which is promoting this information day. You're very welcome to download that and to disseminate it widely with information about this call. Another question, what are soft skills? We take the definition of soft skills from the Council recommendation on key competences for lifelong learning 2018. And there it says that soft skills include the ability to think critically, be curious and creative, to take initiative, to solve problems and work collaboratively, to be able to communicate efficiently in a multicultural and interdisciplinary environment, to be able to adapt to context and to cope with stress and uncertainty. So that is what we mean when we talk about soft skills in this call. Another question, is it possible to develop new digital tools or platforms for a specific project? Yeah, I think this is a very, very important question. I'm glad this one came up. Important to stress here that in order to carry out the activities, projects should rely as far as possible on existing tools and platforms, and this is written specifically in the call document. Should there be a need to develop new tools or platforms, this would need to be justified, but we really want to try and avoid this at all cost. And the reason being is that this funding is not to fund infrastructure, it's to fund the pedagogic skills and competences that can be developed through virtual exchanges. There are many, many existing tools out there that can be used for virtual exchanges. We don't need funding to develop them in order to have virtual exchanges take place. Age range, yeah, it's 13 to 30, but if the project involves people under 18, participating organisations are required to obtain prior authorisation from their parents or those acting on their behalf. Question on the objectives of the call. The specific objectives, they're written on page 7 and 8 of the call document. The budget, this was mentioned by Herman in the presentation, so 4 million in total, 1 million for the Western Balkans and 3 million for the other regions. The specific breakdown can be found in the presentation. Yeah, a good question. Where should the activities take place? So proposals must relate to activities that are taking place in the countries where the partners are based in the project. So that's very important. Because we're virtual exchanges, we have the possibility to have participation of young people from any country in the world. That's not the objective, and the funding is not for that. The funding has to go to the countries that are, where the organizations are based, who are participating in the virtual exchanges project. Duration of the project, yes, projects, we say normally 36 months because it is possible that a project will have an extension, but extensions are only possible if they're duly justified and they require a grant agreement amendment. So yes, 36 months. Maximum grant amount, yeah, that was mentioned already, it's €500,000 per project. And then there were lots of questions, yeah, on countries, on the eligibility of specific countries. There, please look at section 6 of the call for proposals, which mentions the eligible EU regions and then the countries that are part of that EU region. So please make sure that your country is in there. Are any requirements, limitations on the language of communication? So I'm guessing this is for the application. You can submit your application in any of the EU official languages. Will the call 2022 have the same priorities? Regions, you can see that already. It's published, as I mentioned, on FTOP. So all that information is readily available there. We have a question. Is it possible to target 2 regions in one proposal? Yeah, I'm glad this one came up. It's very important to stress that consortium composition must consist of EU programme countries and then one region only. So one non-EU region only. Very, very important to stress that. It's not possible in this call to have EU programme countries plus 2 or more regions. I see we have a question here on the functional mailbox. Yes, it was down for 2 days last week. It's been repaired and I'm definitely receiving emails in it. So I'm surprised that somebody said an error message. Maybe that was last week. So yes, it was down for 2 days, but it's up and running now. Do associated partner organisations who do not receive any funding need a PIC? Yes, in order to include the associated partner in your application on FTOP, you put in the PIC number, and then when you put in the PIC number, the organisation appears automatically in FTOP. Yeah, can minors participate in EVE? I think we've had that already, 13 to 30, but those under 18 need authorisation from parents or guardians. What attachments are mandatory in the application? There you'll see it's not possible to upload attachments apart from the ones that are included on FTOP. So the information is there and it's not possible to add additional attachments. Yeah, and I think that's it. I think I've covered everything there. But you're still welcome to submit questions to the functional mailbox, and we will make an FAQ available with these questions and answers, so the information is available to everybody, and all applicants are treated equally. That's of the utmost importance to us. Back over to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Just quick points to some of the questions raised, just to clarify. The issue of subcontracting was asked, also the question of, okay, what is required for subcontracting? I just wanted to point out that for subcontracting, the national rules apply first and foremost. So you have to make sure that you know what the subcontracting obligations are in your country or in your organization. So they have to be compliant with that. We noted that there was a lot of questions about travel and subsistence. Not surprising, because on the one hand we have it's a virtual exchange, but also there's COVID. So travel and subsistence is possible, but not the core activity of your project is virtual exchange. So obviously, you know, you should walk the talk, and also for the project organization, it's important that you do as much as possible virtually, so that it's in line with the general approach of your offer, and also taking into account the situation with COVID. Our experience has been, you know, that a lot of the the on-site organizations, planned and projects had to be cancelled again and again and again, and this makes budgetary management difficult. So bear this in mind. Yes, it's possible, but bear this in mind. The question about the 36 months, it's important that the duration shouldn't be less also, okay? Russian rightfully explained that you can have an amendment of extension. By the way, the financial regulation foresees a maximum of 6 months, so you can't go beyond that. But what is important, we're not looking for projects of 24 months, for instance. So really the project duration has to be 36 months. You're getting a substantial grant, and we want to have good quality also in terms of projects, implementation and results, of course. So 36 months, go for that. It's very important, of course, that you know that we look, when we evaluate, that the last year is really also a full project year and not added on to what normally would have been a 24-month project. So that's very important. And a final remark about languages. You can apply in the official languages, but what is very important, of course, is that you apply in the language used in your partnership, because the application will be part of your grant agreement, and all your partners should be able to understand what is in the application, as it is the basis for your project. Okay, so now we will come to the closure. I will quickly and go here to switch to this slide. So to finalize, I will quickly do a small recap of what we have been listening to and presenting today. So just to highlight, it's very important that you see the application as a whole. So we had different parts we looked at, but it's very important that you present a comprehensive and coherent application to us. Often people ask, okay, so what is a good application? A good application is, of course, depends. Of course, you have to address what is in the call, but what is also very important is that you convince us of your project that this is a good project. So you have to bear in mind, you know, the call is very clear. There needs to be there are people for whom you are doing this. So there needs to be a needs analysis in your application. Why are we doing this project? Why do we want to help these young people, and with what do we want to help them? So the what is also about the approach. So your approach should be very clear, clearly defined, clearly explained in your application. Again, addressing, of course, the framework and of the call, but you have to be very clear. And there also, you know, what is not in the application is not in the application. So in terms of approach, you cannot just think, okay, I mentioned something because this is well known. That can be the case, but that doesn't explain how this will work in your project, which is very specific. And let's face it, virtual exchange is relatively new, and doing virtual exchange in non-formal and informal settings is also not something which has been documented a lot. So it's very important that you are very clear about this in your application. And then finally, you know, it's also very important that you define, as Herman said, the learning outcomes, so that we can see these are the needs, this is my target group, this is my approach, and these are the expected outcomes. And then also you explain how to get from each stage to realize the outcomes, because of course an application is an estimation. It's what you expect to do. So the clearer you are how you want to do each step, how you plan that, how you present that in the application, the more likely it is that it gets understood correctly. And then just, there was, for instance, the question, okay, I cannot attach CVs. Yes, we don't want CVs because that's part of this comprehensiveness. When you look at the application form, we have separate questions. They are separate, but the important part is they're not standalone. And this is what we understand by comprehensive. So don't take each question as a single question. Make sure, that when you describe, for instance, your partnership, that you explain the competences of the people in this partner organization. So then you explain in a comprehensive way, what their contribution is, why we can see why certain tasks have been allocated to this organization. So the important part is a good application, addresses all the aspects of the call, presents the different stages I just talked about, but then in a very comprehensive and coherent way. Comprehensiveness is important. There are 70 pages in the detailed description. Anything beyond that, we cannot see and cannot be evaluated. So I think with this small recapitulation, we are coming to the end of the event, and for the closure, I will again yield the floor to Marie-Luce, who would like to address you to close the session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So, excuse me, I think this session of information was quite dense, so we slowly reached the end of this event. But before closing this, I would like to answer the team because they worked quite a lot to organize this Info Day event and they worked well. So thank you. Thank you to everyone. So, with all the words that we have, I don't think I will have to add something. Just to say that we are looking forward to receive your application, and we wish you good luck with the preparation. And of course, take care and stay safe. Thank you. Thank you for your participation.